The Power Hour with John Lee.
Joe Kennedy. Now, there is a Joe Kennedy active in the political world now in America. He's like an American Prince Harry, really. Born into privilege. Far too much to say for himself, in my opinion, especially about right and wrong. You know, I mean, if I was brought up in a palace with the servants and bodyguards all over the place, no problems and no dangers, then I might have some really clear ideas about right and wrong as well. But hopefully I would have the good sense to shut my mouth and not go on about it as much as Prince Harry does and as much as Joe Kennedy does. But I'm talking about the original Joe Kennedy, the father of John F. Kennedy. And why is he on my list of surprising relatives? Well, if you read his Wikipedia page or whatever publicity you like to go to, you'll see that he was the ambassador, the American ambassador to England or the UK at one point. He was very rich, very successful. He owned and, of course, lived in the Kennedy compound, where he had a tremendous amount of children. There was an older brother, older than John, that was a war hero and died. There's several sisters. One was lobotomized. Another one married a famous actor, Peter Lawford, I think it was called. But yeah, there are many Kennedys, and they all lived on the Kennedy compound. And most of the brothers went into politics. One of them died, so he couldn't. But Joe Kennedy, apart from being involved in politics and business, his nickname was Bootlegger Joe. Now, if you don't know what a bootlegger is a person that sold alcohol during Prohibition. So as we know, in the 1920s, alcohol was prohibited in the United States. And that really created the mafia, in the sense that was the big opportunity that the new American mafia, the new generation of mainly Italian immigrants, but they came over as kids, and they exploited this. There was money to be made, because when you make something illegal, especially something that people like, they will pay more for it, you know. We see this in the television series Boardwalk Empire. It gives a good perspective on this period of time. And Joe Kennedy is alleged, so I'm starting with him because it's only alleged, that he was a bootlegger, hence the nickname Bootlegger Joe. But he was a high-level, sophisticated bootlegger. He wasn't, according to those who say he was a bootlegger, he didn't hang out the back of a car with a Tommy gun shooting up the streets of Chicago. He was more, aristocratic than that. He didn't get his hands dirty, but he made a lot of money. But what is definitely true is that he had a lot of contacts in the mafia. And people make the natural connection, well, how? You know, if his life story is as it's often presented, and he had no contact with criminality at all, how did he know so many members of the mafia? And he did, and that's not disputed, that he did. Even in there's a television miniseries called The Kennedys, and it's showing the Kennedys in the nicest possible light. You know, the best possible way of viewing the Kennedys is that miniseries. And even in that miniseries, Joe Kennedy is shown to know the mafia. And what is a historical fact is that with the assistance of Frank Sinatra, Joe Kennedy went to see a man called Sam Giancana. And at this point, this was in the 50s, late 50s, because Kennedy was running for president against Nixon, which he won in 1960, became the president with the smallest margin in history. I don't know if it's still the smallest margin now, but it certainly was then. And it was looking very difficult for John F. Kennedy to win the election because nobody knew who he was. Nixon was already famous, backed by the Bush family, which we can talk about another time on the Power Hour, backed by Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush and the grandfather of George W. Bush. Anyway, so they needed help, the Kennedys, to get John F. Kennedy into the White House. And it was very important for them to win the state of Illinois. And, of course, Chicago is in Illinois. And Sam Giancana was the boss of the Chicago mob, which was made famous really by Al Capone during Prohibition. That's when Al Capone became Al Capone, because he made so much money from the illegal alcohol trade and obviously prostitution, etc. So by the time Sam Giancana got there 20 years later and became the boss, I mean, he was a ruthless killer. But he was also very intelligent. He was a good businessman. He turned that Chicago mob into a massive organization. And he was extremely powerful, extremely charismatic. But he was a criminal. He was one of the most dangerous men in the world, Sam Giancana, at that time. And Joe Kennedy went to speak to Sam Giancana. Even this is in the miniseries, the Kennedy miniseries. He goes to Sam Giancana and he says, look, I want my son to win the election. I want him to win the election in Illinois. You know, let's make a deal. The details of the deal, I wasn't in the room, so I can't testify to that. But, you know, deals are normally reciprocal, aren't they? So you give and you take. Anyway, what they took was a guarantee. The Kennedys took a guarantee that John F. Kennedy would win the election in the state of Illinois. And that happened. Sam Giancana sent his men out and they stopped people voting for Nixon. Anybody who wanted to vote for Nixon was not allowed to vote for Nixon. They were encouraged, you know, by very scary people to get up and go and vote for the Irishman. So when Italian gangsters, and the Italians and the Irish have a very complicated history, especially in America, really uniquely in America, because they were all immigrants. When the Italians are going around saying vote for the Irish kid to be the president, you know there's something happening. You know, something's up with this situation. But that's what happened. And of course, Kennedy then became the president. And Sam Giancana, by all accounts, it's even in his book that he wrote with his brother, that he felt that he owned the White House. He told everybody, we own the presidency, we own the president, we own the White House. We've got no more problems. Of course, that's not what happened. John F. Kennedy appointed his brother, Robert Kennedy, to be the Attorney General, which is the most powerful position in law enforcement in the United States. Even though Robert Kennedy had no experience and was very young. But he was tenacious and he was strong and he was very intelligent and very aggressive, much more aggressive than John. And Robert Kennedy went after the mafia. He put them on television, he embarrassed them, he harassed them, he hounded them. He did the same to Jimmy Hoffa. The Kennedys made a lot of enemies in the criminal world. And mainly because the mafia certainly felt that they actually put Kennedy in the White House to begin with. So if you don't know that story, you do, or you didn't know that story, you do now.